The discovery. The wrench snapped, sending brass shrapnel sizzling past Miles's ear. The temperature regulator on his workbench was failing again, and the heat exchanger's coils hissed menacingly as toxic coolant threatened to flood his workshop. Miles wiped sweat from his brow, fishing through his tool belt for the modified socket wrench, the one with the worn blue handle and the odd brass fitting his mother had soldered on years ago. The fitting looked more decorative than functional, with peculiar notches that didn't match any bolt pattern he'd ever encountered. Still, the wrench had never failed him yet. His environmental suit, patched in a dozen places with electrical tape and pressure sealant, was already showing warning indicators around the collar. One more system failure he couldn't afford right now. "Come on, you over-engineered nightmare," he muttered, applying pressure until the exchanger's panel finally popped open with a spray of condensation. A familiar tingling sensation crawled up his arm from the wrench, like static electricity, but somehow wetter. The sensation had been occurring more frequently lately, especially when systems were on the verge of catastrophic failure. The monitor above his workstation flickered to life unexpectedly, displaying what appeared to be a thermal scan. Miles squinted at the peculiar heat signature. It resembled nothing in the settlement's database. The upper portion showed what might have been a vessel, but the lower half was dominated by a strangely organic shape pulsing with impossible energy readings. Something about the pattern made his stomach clench. The system couldn't identify the source, but it was close, much too close for comfort. 2 days ago, he'd found a cargo pod drifting near the station. He'd been meaning to inspect it, but maintenance work had kept him busy. Now, as he glanced at the pod sitting near his feet, it was shaking violently, its security seals glowing with an eerie blue energy. The tingling from the wrench intensified, spreading across his shoulder blades like icy fingers. Then, without warning, the perimeter alarm never sounded. One moment Miles was alone in his workshop, and the next, the far wall simply disintegrated. Not with an explosion, worse. The metal and composite materials seemed to lose molecular cohesion, falling away like sand. Through the newly formed hole stepped 3 figures in articulated armor that made them look like oversized insects. Their helmets featured elongated, angular visors that glowed a sickly orange. The smell of copper filled the air, so strong it made his tongue go numb, and the darkness behind them seemed to bend and ripple as though reality itself was being stretched. "Unauthorized salvage operation," the tallest one said, its voice modulator producing perfect standard but with a delay between syllables that made Miles's teeth hurt. "Surrender the anomaly and receive compensation according to Directive 88. Miles had no idea what they were talking about, but he kept the wrench firmly in his grip as he backed toward the emergency exit. "There's been a mistake. This is a registered repair facility on a colonial outpost. I'm not salvaging anything." The shortest hunter made a sound that might have been laughter. "The chronastic signature is active in this location. Our scanners do not err." It raised a weapon that resembled a fishing gaff more than a gun, with tendrils of blue energy coiling around its prongs. "Final warning, surrender the Drake Core artifact or face immediate disintegration." That's when Miles noticed the cargo pod near his feet was shaking even more violently, its seals now blazing with the same blue energy that emanated from the hunter's weapons. The bond. Before Miles could respond, the pod split open with a hiss of equalizing pressure. A creature the size of a cat emerged, unfurling leathery wings and a sinuous neck topped with a reptilian head. Its scales gleamed copper-red in the workshop's emergency lighting, and its eyes, intelligent and terrified, locked onto Miles immediately. The creature let out a sound between a chirp and a growl, then darted behind his legs, putting him between it and the hunters. "Target acquired," said the middle hunter, raising its weapon. "Prepare for extraction." "Wait!" Miles shouted, not entirely sure why he was defending a creature he'd just met. "What exactly are you planning to do with it?" "The Drake Core is unstable temporal technology, human," the tallest hunter replied. "Its chronastic matrix will be harvested to power our transit systems. The process is necessarily terminal for the specimen." The small dragon pressed against Miles's ankle, trembling. The tingling sensation from the wrench now spread throughout his entire body, and somehow he knew with absolute certainty that these hunters were lying. The creature wasn't technology, it was alive and terrified. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," Miles said, trying to keep his voice steady. "This looks like a living being to me, not a piece of technology. Maybe we can discuss this without weapons." The hunters exchanged looks through their glowing visors. "Unexpected development," the middle one said. "Subject displays protective behavior toward the Drake core. Possible chronastic contamination." "Irrelevant," replied the tall one. "Human interference is a minor delay factor." The shortest hunter stepped forward. "Proposal, we take both specimens. The human may provide insight into Drake core adaptation to this timeline." Miles felt the blood drain from his face. The Drake made another chirping sound, somehow conveying both fear and defiance in a single note. Miles glanced down at it, then at his wrench, then at the still open panel of the heat exchanger. A desperate plan began to form. "Listen," he said slowly, moving toward the workbench, "I found this Drake core by accident. I don't know anything about it, but if you need it that badly, maybe we can negotiate. I'm authorized to trade on behalf of the colony." The hunters paused, their helmet visors flickering as they presumably communicated privately. Miles used the moment to edge closer to the heat exchanger. The Drake seemed to sense his intentions, moving with him while staying behind his legs. "Negotiation is acceptable," the tall hunter finally said, "but your authority is questionable. Our scans indicate this facility is isolated from the main colony. You appear to be operating independently." "That's because I'm the outpost's engineer," Miles replied, finally reaching the workbench. "I maintain critical systems, including this heat exchanger, which, by the way, is currently reaching critical pressure." The tall hunter tilted its head. "Your threat is noted but ineffective. Our armor protects against thermal events. Does it protect against a Drake core explosion?" Miles bluffed, having no idea if such a thing was possible. "Because I'm betting this little guy doesn't want to be harvested and might just prefer going out with a bang." The Drake chirped louder, as if understanding, and the hunters took a synchronous step backward. "Temporal detonation is problematic," the middle hunter admitted. "Perhaps alternative arrangements can be discussed." Miles's fingers found the emergency coolant valve behind the panel. "I'm listening." The revelation. What followed was the strangest negotiation of Miles's life. The hunters, who called themselves Chrono Wardens, claimed to be from a regulatory agency overseeing temporal anomalies across multiple dimensions. The Drake, according to them, was not merely a creature but a living temporal engine, a biological mechanism capable of manipulating time itself. They insisted it had been created as a weapon by a long-dead civilization and needed to be contained. "If this thing is so dangerous," Miles asked, keeping his hand firmly on the coolant valve, "why not just leave it alone? It seems pretty harmless to me." "Naive assessment," the shortest hunter said. "Drake cores mature rapidly. Within one local solar cycle, it will develop chronastic field generation capabilities. Within 3, it could potentially create localized time loops or acceleration pockets. Unchecked, it will destabilize your entire stellar system." The Drake, who had climbed onto Miles's shoulder during the conversation, made a sound that distinctly resembled an indignant snort. It had been remarkably calm throughout the discussion, occasionally tilting its head as if following along. "But you're not planning to contain it," Miles pointed out. "You said you're going to harvest it. Kill it. Its biological components are integrated with its temporal mechanisms," the middle hunter explained with a tone that suggested it was being very patient with a particularly slow child. "Separation is impossible without terminating function." The Drake nuzzled against Miles's neck, and the tingling sensation from the wrench spread again. Suddenly, he saw a flash of memory that wasn't his own, a workshop much like his, but older, more elaborate. A woman with his same dark hair and eyes was working on a strange device, the wrench in her hand glowing with blue energy. A small bronze scale, just like the ones covering the Drake, was embedded in the wrench's handle. The woman looked up directly at him, her expression serious but kind. "The wrench finds the right fit," she said, though her lips didn't move. "The drake finds the right heart. Together they bend time, but apart they break it." Miles gasped as the vision faded, nearly dropping the wrench. The drake made a soft trilling sound, and Miles somehow knew it had shown him that memory, or future, or whatever it was. "You're lying," he said to the hunters with newfound confidence. "This drake isn't some weapon. It's a keeper of something, something you want to steal." The tallest hunter's visor flashed red. "Human reasoning is flawed. The Drake core represents dangerous technology that must be regulated. Your emotional attachment clouds your judgment." "My emotional attachment?" Miles laughed bitterly. "You're the ones who want to tear apart a living creature for spare parts. I may not understand temporal mechanics, but I understand right from wrong." The drake chirped softly and pressed something into Miles's hand, a small, warm stone that pulsed with the same blue energy as his wrench. The moment it touched his skin, the workshop around him flickered, and he saw the truth. The Chrono Wardens weren't regulators, they were pirates, harvesting temporal creatures across the galaxy to power their ships and weapons. The drake wasn't a weapon, it was a refugee, one of the last of its kind, fleeing from these very hunters. And his mother's wrench wasn't just a tool, it was a key, designed to work with drake temporal fields to unlock something far more significant than a stubborn heat exchanger. "I know what you really are," Miles said quietly. "And I know what you're really after." The hunters raised their weapons in unison. "Knowledge acquisition complete," the tall one announced. "Termination protocols engaged." Part 4, The Escape. Miles didn't think, he acted. His hand yanked the emergency coolant valve as the drake leaped from his shoulder, spreading its wings. The workshop erupted in a cloud of superheated steam and toxic vapor, but instead of the chaos Miles expected, time seemed to slow around him. The drake's eyes blazed with blue fire as it hovered in the air, its wings beating in slow motion. The hunter's energy weapons discharged, but their deadly beams crawled through the air like sluggish lightning, giving Miles plenty of time to dive behind his workbench. The temporal field was incredible, Miles could see every droplet of coolant hanging in the air, could watch the hunters' expressions change frame by frame as they realized their prey had turned the tables. But the strain was enormous. The drake's small body shuddered with effort, and Miles knew it couldn't maintain this for long. He grabbed his tool belt and the mysterious stone the drake had given him, then made his way to the emergency exit. As he moved, the drake slowly followed, its temporal field creating a bubble of safety around them both. They burst through the exit just as the field collapsed. The drake tumbled from the air, exhausted, and Miles caught it instinctively. Behind them, the hunter's weapons finally struck where they had been standing, reducing his workshop to molten slag. "Can you do that time thing again?" Miles whispered as he ran toward the service tunnels beneath the outpost. The drake made a weak chirping sound and shook its head. Its scales had dimmed considerably, and Miles could feel it trembling with exhaustion. "Okay, we do this the old-fashioned way then." Miles knew every maintenance tunnel, every service hatch, every forgotten corner of the outpost. He'd spent 3 years keeping this place running, and now that knowledge was their only hope of survival. The hunters were undoubtedly tracking them, but their advanced technology might work against them in the maze of old infrastructure. He made his way to the central core, where the outpost's main power generator hummed steadily. If he could reach the communication array, he might be able to send a distress signal, though he wasn't sure who would believe his story about time-traveling dragon thieves. The drake stirred in his arms and looked up at him with those intelligent eyes. It made a soft sound and pressed its small hand against his chest, over his heart. Suddenly, Miles understood. The drake wasn't just exhausted from the temporal field, it was dying. The separation from its kind, the stress of being hunted, the energy expenditure of protecting them both, it was too much for the small creature. "No," Miles whispered. "I'm not letting you give up. We're going to figure this out." The drake pointed weakly at the stone it had given him, then at his mother's wrench. As Miles held them close together, both items began to glow with soft blue light. The drake's scales brightened slightly, and it made a questioning trill. Miles didn't understand the science, but he understood the message. The wrench and the stone were connected, part of some larger system his mother had somehow been involved with. And the drake was the key to unlocking it. A thunderous crash echoed through the tunnels behind them. The hunters had found their trail. "Hang on," Miles told the drake. "We're going to the one place on this station they won't expect." He climbed a maintenance ladder that led to the station's outer hull, where the solar collection arrays spread like metallic wings against the stars. It was dangerous. His patched environmental suit might not hold in the vacuum, but it was their only chance. As they emerged onto the station's surface, Miles saw something that made his heart stop. Ships were approaching, not the sleek craft of the hunters, but massive, ancient vessels with organic curves and surfaces that seemed to shift and flow like living things. The drake saw them too and let out a joyful cry that Miles felt rather than heard in the vacuum of space. These weren't more enemies, they were family. The choice. The ancient ships settled around the outpost like sleeping giants, their hulls rippling with the same blue energy that flowed through the drake's scales. Miles watched in awe as creatures similar to his small companion emerged from the vessels, some no larger than the drake, others magnificent beings the size of shuttles, their wings spanning impossible distances in the vacuum of space. They communicated without sound, patterns of light dancing across their scales in complex sequences. The drake in Miles's arms responded weakly, its own scales flickering with dim patterns that seemed to say, "Safe now," and "Thank you," and "Friend." The largest of the ancient beings approached them, moving with fluid grace despite its enormous size. When it spoke, Miles heard the words directly in his mind, accompanied by images and emotions that conveyed meaning far beyond language. "Child of the Keeper," it said, its mental voice warm with gratitude. "You have protected our young one when all seemed lost. The debt between our kinds grows deeper." Miles's head reeled. "Keeper? You mean my mother?" Images flooded his mind, his mother, younger than he remembered, working alongside these beings to build a network of safe havens across the galaxy. The wrench, the stones, the hidden modifications to outpost systems he'd never understood, they were all part of a vast sanctuary network, designed to protect refugees from across space and time. She was one of the first to understand that preservation, not exploitation, was the path to true knowledge, the being explained. When the harvesters began their campaigns of temporal genocide, she helped us create sanctuaries where our people could hide. "The Chrono Wardens," Miles said, understanding dawning. "They're not regulators, they're the harvesters. They have pursued our young across 17 dimensions. We feared this one lost forever." The being's attention turned to the drake, who was growing brighter as it absorbed energy from its kin. "But you, Keeper's son, have given it something we could not, the will to fight, the knowledge that not all other species seek to consume us." Through the station's hull, Miles could see the hunters' ships approaching, their angular forms dark against the star field. But he was no longer afraid. The ancient fleet was vast, and their technology made the hunters' weapons look like toys. The battle, when it came, was swift and decisive. The temporal fields generated by the ancient fleet didn't just slow the hunters' attacks, they rewound them, unmaking the energy weapons discharge, reversing the hunters' approach vectors until they found themselves back where they started, confused and disoriented. "They will not trouble this sector again," the being assured Miles as the hunter ships retreated at maximum velocity. "We have shown them that there are forces in this universe they do not understand and cannot harvest." The drake, now fully recovered and glowing with health, nuzzled against Miles's helmet one last time. It had grown during the encounter, no longer the small creature he'd first found but a young adult with bright, confident eyes. "It must come with us now," the being explained gently. "To learn the ways of its people, to help us find others who need sanctuary." Miles nodded, though his heart ached at the thought of losing his strange companion. "I understand. But, will I see it again?" The drake chirped happily and pressed another stone into his gloved hand, this one carved with intricate symbols that seemed to shift and change as he watched. The sanctuary network endures, the being said. And keepers are always needed. When you are ready to follow in your mother's path, use the stone. We will be waiting. As the ancient fleet prepared to depart, the Drake looked back at Miles one final time and sent him a complex pattern of emotions: gratitude, friendship, promise, and hope. Then the ships vanished, not into hyperspace but into time itself, leaving only a brief shimmer in the starlight to mark their passage. Miles floated alone above his outpost, holding the carved stone and his mother's wrench, finally understanding the legacy she'd left him. He wasn't just an engineer keeping systems running, he was a guardian, protecting something far more precious than equipment. He climbed back into the station and began planning repairs to his workshop. There would be other refugees, other creatures fleeing the harvester's endless hunger. And when they came, he would be ready. The stone pulsed warmly in his pocket, and somewhere in the vast network of time and space, a young Drake sent him feelings of friendship across the dimensional void. Miles smiled and got back to work. The universe was vast and dangerous, but it was also full of wonders worth protecting. And he had his mother's tools, her knowledge, and now her purpose. The sanctuary would endure. The end.